Cool. All right, we're going to get started here. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Hussein Zayan. I'm here with the CEO and founder of Random Logic, Andrew Stone.
Hey guys.
Today we're going to be talking about a topic we're both really excited about. And this is going to be about bringing an app from the dead, how to breathe life into a new app. And we'll discuss an app that Andrew and I worked on in his portfolio for this. So a little bit about ironSource, just to give some of you guys a background here. We're a leading developer in the growth platform for mobile games. Our product is a mediation tool as well as user acquisition and monetization. We mainly focus on helping game developers grow their apps through our platform and acquiring users and monetizing those users. We've been around for about 10 years now and still going strong. And here's a selection of some of the partners that we do work with, Random Logic being one of them, but we focus mainly on the gaming space, as I mentioned before, with partners in all sorts of verticals through hyper-casual, mid-core, card games, etc. We're a big partner for a lot of these developers. If you guys are interested in checking out our webinars, this one and as well as past webinars, please join us on our website, ironsource.com/webinars. We have a lot of good content here, and you can check this webinar out as well in the website. Perfect. So getting on today's agenda, we have a really cool topic that we're super excited to talk about. Our agenda today is going to talk a little bit about Random Logic's growth challenges. Andrew will talk about his company, as well as some of the challenges for him and how we've been able to help. We're going to use the growth loop and the framework to discuss kind of how we were able to bring this app from the dead, discussing marketability, creative, and LTV best practices. And then we'll tie it all back together with how we did this for Guess the Emoji in particular, and tying it back to all the best practices we discussed.
All right. Hey guys, this is Andrew from Random Logic. My business partner and I founded Random Logic Games back in 2014, and since then have been growing. We've got a number of employees. We're a fairly small company. We've got 8 employees here based in Birmingham, Alabama, and we build primarily word, trivia, and logic games. All right. So more specifically today, we're going to talk about one of our hit games called Guess the Emoji. This game was one of the first games that we built back in 2014, before we really knew what we were doing in the App Store. So at that time, we were more or less just publishing games that we thought were cool, games that we were capable of building, and Guess the Emoji was one of those games. So when we published the game back in the day, this was the time when you could still publish games on the store and get a large amount of kind of organic downloads without doing much user acquisition, because quite frankly at the time we had no idea how to do user acquisition. So not long after launching Guess the Emoji, the game started to pick up traction and eventually went extremely viral. It went to the #1 position in the UK, a number of European countries, Egypt, all over the place. And then finally, last but not least, it ended up going viral in the US and actually went to #1 in the US, stayed in the #1 position for a total of 16 days. And it was a really exciting time. So again, this game was primarily ad-based, and thinking back, I believe we mainly had banners in the app. So your typical 320 by 50 banner was the main monetization ad unit in the game. There may have also been a small amount of interstitial there as well, but this was kind of a time before rewarded video had kind of taken off mainstream. And there were also some in-app purchases in the game. Users could buy coins to pay for hints, and it actually got to number 28 grossing overall. But since then, the game's kind of, through 2015, 2016, 2017, more or less, the game has just kind of sat on the App Store, not doing much of anything. We're going to tell you a little bit more about how we kind of revived Guess the Emoji from the dead and breathed new life into this game. So let's see. So reviewing our company, again, we've got 8 people here in Birmingham. Not a big team, of course. We've also got a large number of contractors spread around the world. So through the last 6 years or so, we've been able to build a large number of games. So as well as Guess the Emoji, we've got Infinite Word Search, Crossword Quiz, a number of other titles. You can check us out on the App Store. With having a large number of games and a small team, we needed a platform that could do a little bit of everything. We were right from the beginning kind of an early adopter of mediation back when we started as a company. And over time, we were looking for a platform that could help us earn the most from the ads that we show, of course. So all the games that we have, 90% of the revenue that we make is going to be through ads. And as the ecosystem of the App Store has changed, where you used to have apps that would go viral back in 2014 without much user acquisition, as you know, today it's very different. You basically can't survive without UA. Historically, as we've learned UA, we've been more or less buying blind. So, you know, if you have an app that monetizes with in-app purchases, it's fairly easy to buy on ROAS, which has historically not been the case with ad monetized games. So coming on to ironSource, we'll talk a little more about it, but being able to merge, you know, user level ad revenue data with our attribution data has allowed us to buy just like any other app can buy. Also, we have tried a number of things along the way to improve our ad monetization. Again, we've always used mediation, but we've never known for sure if we're using the best strategy. ironSource has really helped us with that. And I've mentioned it before, but Infinite Word Search has historically been over the last 3 or 4 years, been a really big title for us. We'll kind of get into that app and Guess the Emoji a little more later. So Hussein.
Awesome. So thank you, Andrew. So one of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about and kind of what sparked our thought about bringing an app to the dead was sort of understanding the market trends today. So when we sit back and take a look at the market, there's a clear distinction between 2015, 2014, around the time when Guess the Emoji was popular, and today's market. So this slide here will show a little bit of those differences. We can see that the 2015 chart versus the 2020 chart. The 2015 chart, you can see that most of the apps here are big titles with lots of downloads. So you see the numbers that start from the 19 million and go down to 10 million. These are the number of downloads. You see the amount of downloads these apps had to really make the top charts, and they're big titles like Candy Crush and Clash of Clans. So the App Store back then was primarily filled with these bigger, more popular apps that went viral and had a lot of featuring in the App Store, and you can see that they took up most of the chart. Fast forward to today's day, you can see it's a very different type of market that we live in. A lot more hyper casual owns the top charts, takes a lot less downloads. You can see it's even less than 50% of the downloads to make it to the #1. And you can see that the App Store priority, you can see that it changes a lot. Apps get shoot to #1, then go way back down. So we can see the distinction here, and the way that we wanted to distinguish the two is 2015, you can say a little bit more higher LTV, lower IPM. In 2020, a little bit of the opposite. But the first thing that we really wanted to look at when we thought of this idea was kind of the market trends and what is going on today versus what happened before. And then this kind of hits home that point here. So this is you take a look at our network as a whole, you can see that IPMs are continuing to skyrocket, especially in the last year and a half. The average IPM in 2018, so 2 years ago, was about 6.9. In 2017, it was 2.1. And then today, it's about 17. So you can see that the IPMs have shot way up, allowing apps with lower LTV to bid and be competitive in the market. Again, this reiterates some of that as well. We can see that the eCPIs have gone way down as well, sort of a correlation to the IPMs going up. So eCPIs, even $15 to $20, were sort of more in the market, and now it's gone down. And you can see that almost around the 50 cents to $1 are taking up the market here. So this is sort of a visualization of the market trend over the last 4 or 5 years. And Andrew will talk a little bit about the workshop that we had that sort of sparked our initiative for this.
Right. So kind of mid-year last year, Hussein and the crew at ironSource invited me up to San Francisco from Alabama. And we decided that, you know, as we made the transition onto the ironSource platform, that we needed to have a little workshop. We needed to understand, they needed to understand, I guess, what our goals were, and we needed to fully understand the ironSource platform. So at that workshop, we talked about a number of things. These are some of the most impactful things. The first one is the ad revenue management tool, which I spoke about a little bit earlier. This allows you to, with a high degree of accuracy, attribute ad revenue to your installer. So, and then if you merge that data with your attribution data from Kochava or whatever mobile measurement partner that you use, AppsFlyer, et cetera, then you can effectively see, slice and dice any way you want, and see your data and see the ARPU as it grows over time. You can see ROAS, and of course, at the end of the day, you can then begin to buy on ROAS at every single source that you're buying at. Another big thing for us was the A/B testing, where this is something we wanted to always be able to do. It is not an easy thing to do, to set up an A/B test for a monetization waterfall. It was possible in the past, I guess, if you spent a lot of development time and you built this out, but for our small team, it was definitely not possible. Moving on to the ironSource platform, it's as simple as going into a UI on their dashboard, setting up a split test, and waiting for the data to come in. This has allowed us to see for sure if the waterfall setup that we have is ideal. Again, we talked a little bit about ARM already, but being able to now buy on true ROAS, where we can finally buy on day 3, day 7, day 14, whatever we want. ROAS is extremely important to us and was not possible without this, the ad revenue management tool. Also at the workshop, we kind of went really in depth and reviewed a lot of the data that Hussein just spoke on, like how is IPM changing? How is this affecting CPI? How does IPM relate to eCPM? How does that place us in the auction, et cetera? So we got a real good education there on how to buy and how to buy on ROAS, and how to use good creative to push up your IPM and increase your eCPM in the auctions. Last but not least, it goes without saying, Hussein, Leah, the team there at ironSource is fantastic. We have a great relationship with them, and that was very important as we made the move over.
Perfect. So just like Jon Snow, we'll talk a little bit about how to
Spoiler alert here.
Spoiler alert. We'll talk about how to bring an app from the dead using the growth loop framework here. So we'll talk a little bit about what is the growth loop and how do we use that to bring an app from the dead. Awesome. So when we look at the growth loop here, we're going to go through this a little bit. We want to dissect it into kind of 2 pieces. You have the market, and then you have the game itself. So we talked a little bit about the market on a holistic level with the top charts here. We'll talk a little bit about how to dissect that and then talk a little bit about the game itself. So kind of the steps of the growth loop: you acquire users either through organic or paid traffic. And then you set up sort of monetization schemes, whether through ads or IAP, to basically monetize those users. For Guest Emoji, it was mainly an ad-driven model here. Then we take a look and kind of like maximize and optimize the monetization through waterfall management. Goal here is to maximize the LTV as much as possible. And then circling back, basically taking the UA and if you're doing retargeting, optimizing the user acquisition that you're doing through buying smartly, through tactics like using ARM and things like that. The goal here for the marketing side is to maximize profit, and on the monetization side to maximize LTV. So those are the 2 ways those are the 2 things that you want to keep in mind. when like thinking about the growth loop. So we'll use this framework to kind of discuss how we were able to put it into place for Guess the Emoji. And for us, the focus was on three main concepts. There's a lot of concepts within this growth loop, but we found three that would really help us drive home this concept of bringing the app from the dead for Guess the Emoji. So they were marketability, basically how receptive is the market to your game. We'll discuss a little bit about creative and the best practices there, and then tie it together with LTV modeling as well as sort of granular bidding and buying on ROAS. So what is marketability? So marketability mainly covers this part of the funnel for the growth loop. Basically, again, how receptive is the market to your game? That's basically the key metric and a very unknown metric. So when we think about marketability, we really think about this basic equation. Your bid, which represents more or less your LTV, multiplied by your IPM being sort of the marketability factor, and IPM representing the amount of installs per 1,000 impressions. Again, reiterating the point of how marketable is my game. And this is the biggest unknown factor. So a lot of games that come to market, you don't really know this part of the equation. And it's very important to find out basically what the IPM looks like here. And then if you take bid times your IPM, you get your eCPM, and eCPM represents basically your buying power in the market. So we'll take an example here. Again, putting this into perspective, if you look at the left, you can see basically an app with a average bid of around $5, representing more or less an LTV very close to that, times an IPM of 4. So 4 installs per 1,000 impressions. If you take those and multiply them, you get an eCPM of 20. A very competitive eCPM, but the equation looks very different than the one on the right. The right has a low bid, about 50 cents, representing somewhat of a low LTV, multiplied by a high IPM of 40, getting you the same eCPM. So you can basically take these two types of apps. The one on the left probably represents more of what we saw in 2015 and 2014. And you can see that how the time has changed and how it's evolved into an app like the one on the right with a lower LTV but high IPM. And these two apps basically have the same eCPM, which basically means they have the same buying power in the market. So when we think about this, again, we try to think about kind of where can you buy at scale, and we looked at a lot of our traffic and where the eCPMs can sort of get you marketable at scale. So again, if you take a look at app A, you can see that the bid representing about $1 with an IPM of 5 has a $5 eCPM, which isn't that marketable, meaning it doesn't have enough buying power to buy at scale, versus app B, again, with a low LTV around 20 cents, but a very high IPM. So what does this mean? This means that IPM is an unknown factor, but it's also can help you significantly in terms of understanding if you can buy at scale, and is the other part of the equation along with LTV to be able to understand if you can actually have a marketable game. So we talked a little bit about what's the importance of IPM, what does it represent, and the marketability equation. We'll dive a little bit into creatives and IPM as a framework and trying to understand kind of how do we bring up that IPM. So IPM, again, represents the amount of installs per 1,000 impressions. So how marketable is your game? How receptive is the market to the game? I mean, these are some of the ways you can affect your IPM. The first being creatives. Creatives are the most important factor for your IPM, but there's also a couple other things that you can take a look at as well to maximize the IPM. So things like App Store optimization, so making sure you have a high star rating, it's charting, the video or icons are tested and kind of represent the game. Even things like the content rating or the app size. Basically what you want here is to make sure that the click to install is as smooth and as seamless as possible for users. So anything affecting that sort of funnel is going to impact your IPM. And then when Andrew and I sat down and we looked at sort of the portfolio, the biggest thing that we really wanted to understand, and the biggest thing to understand in terms of the IPM, is sort of, where do I start? What's the benchmark I'm looking for? So for many of you, though, that have a number of titles in different genres all across the board, it's really important to at least have sort of a benchmark to understand, or at least a benchmark to shoot for. So for Guess the Emoji in particular, we were hovering between a brain and puzzle IPM and a hyper casual. Game is sort of in between those two. So we do have a wide spectrum here, but we do know that we needed to shoot for a higher IPM given what we could understand a little bit about the LTV. So this is sort of a nice little breakdown of the IPMs with the CTR, the CVR, click-through rate, and conversion rate, the average, the max, and the minimum. So again, this is just good, helpful data for us to understand. And this is really what we looked at initially to understand where did we need to shoot for from the IPM perspective. And then when we took a look at the creative side of it as well, we understood that there's a number of types of creative that our studio is able to build. So these are the popular ad formats: playable ads, you have your video playable, as well as your interactive end card. So we have a number of ad formats that can be used, and a lot of them kind of differed per genre or per app. So the main focus here was to test these types of ad formats to really try and drive the IPM as high as possible. So the playable ad represents kind of what it stands for. It's an ad unit that you can interact with and you can play, get a flavor for what the game will look like. Strict video is sort of just a video of the game. Your video playable is sort of a mix of a video and playable ad, but it's sort of somewhat interactive, allows you to kind of choose within a video, but it's sort of a linear path through the ad unit. And then an interactive end card, which we like to pair with the video, is sort of a little bit of the end part of the video that allows you to interact and gives you sort of a little taste for the game after the video as well. So we pair the video with the interactive end card here quite a bit. And then when we thought about creative, especially for Guess the Emoji, these were some of the pillars that we wanted to think about in terms of what did we come up with for creative concepts. So we thought about like sort of the game theme. What do we want to talk about in terms of the theme of the game? We also wanted to look at sort of similar games and what they're doing creative-wise and get inspiration from them. And then looking at marketable themes, so things like you versus your parents. I think that's a popular theme we've seen, or some of the fire destruction creative has been pretty popular. So really understanding, again, the market and what's been out there will help us understand what kind of creative we want to put to market. The motivation for the gamer, so taking a look at stats like if winning or losing has driven higher IPM, looking at what parts of the game do the users really like to play and sort of mimicking that in the ad creative. And then the last piece is sort of the emotion part here, which is eliciting some sort of emotion from the users to be able to drive up the IPM. So all these sort of pillars, you can kind of combine them together and sort of pick and choose the different types of creative you want to run with, and that gets you sort of your creative concept. So in terms of the creative, we talked a little bit high level, but wanted to leave you guys with some takeaways here. First and foremost, creative is definitely one of the most important levers. It's not a one-size-fit-all solution here, but there's a lot of framework for being able to try to create the best ad unit that you can. And it's definitely one of the most important levers for driving up your IPM. You know, in terms of the UA aspect of it as well, you know, a lot of it's being automated even through some of the stuff that we're doing and other partners are doing. So we think that, you know, this creative piece is sort of the, you know, one of the few human factors there. So, you know, using sort of the emotion part of it or some of the different testings is going to try to help there as much as possible. You know, making sure that you leverage emotion, motivation, really trying to address the biggest market that you can to improve your chances for a download or an engaged user. Very important there as well. We've even tested concepts like exploring beyond your game or even testing a little bit of that. I think we've seen mixed results there. You could test a little bit beyond the game, but not too far. There's always going to be a relationship between how far away from the game your creative is and sort of the retention of the users or the expectation those users have of the game. But it's worth testing for sure. And then our last point, which we hit home here, is making sure you test. This is one of the most important things that we saw for this app in particular. Was we did a lot of creative testing. We put a lot of things out there, and we really wanted to make sure that we tested all sorts of types of creative and ad units. Perfect. So we talked a little bit about the IPM and the marketability, defining the kind of basic equation here, which is your bid times your IPM representing again your marketability, diving into a little bit more of the creative aspect of that IPM. We're going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about the bid aspect, which sort of represents your LTV. And how do we define an LTV curve? And then tying that back to the growth loop here, this is the aspect of the game, kind of your game. How do you maximize your LTV or your ARPU? Again, through either monetization or even sort of your buying and understanding that as well. So one of the things that we looked at and we discussed with Andrew was the sort of how do we predict our LTV? How do we come up with an LTV? And then even taking one step back here, how do we differentiate between an IAP, so an in-app purchase, and an ad revenue LTV? One of the things that we found and one of the things that was important for us to understand is that these two curves behave differently. They have different projections. And it's important to be able to distinguish and be able to get the revenue from IAP as well as ad revenue to look at a holistic LTV. It's very important to kind of define the right combined LTV curve, making sure that you're using both to define your LTV, to maximize your buying power in the market. And then once you've established that LTV and use a model for the LTV, to be able to define ROAS goals that can buy up against the LTV, which we'll talk about here in a sec. So this is a snapshot of what some of the LTV looks like from our end that we worked with Andrew on for Guess the Emoji. So taking a little bit of a snapshot here, you can take a look at the curve. It represents sort of two predictions, ad revenue, which is the blue, as well as the IAP, which is the red. And you can see that we stack them both on top of each other to get our total LTV. A couple things to note here. You can see that as time goes on, you get to the 180, 270, and 365 prediction, your buying power improves. Whether marginally or greatly, that's dependent on the curve, but it does improve. But you do also have more risk associated with that. So you can see that for this LTV in particular, your total LTV is 48 cents with in-app purchases and ad revenue for 365 versus 39 cents on day 90. Again, a decision you want to make as a business, whether you want to buy on a 90-day or 365 or even shorter than the 90-day, but it's important to distinguish that. The other piece here you can take a look at is that once you've defined the break-even day, whether it's 90 or 365 or even earlier, you want to set a true ROAS target on an earlier day, so day 3 or day 7, to be able to buy more efficiently. So instead of waiting 90 days for optimizations, you want to buy on a 3-day model for that 90 days and then be able to optimize accordingly so that you're optimizing at a much more frequent cadence than once every 90 days. So we set up sort of an LTV curve for him. We were able to kind of like define that LTV and understand that. One of the things that we noticed here, and this is an example of what we saw, and you typically will see in a lot of games, is that without the ad revenue piece, you can see that for this example, most buyers will look at sort of the IAP revenue and basically associate the ROAS or the CPI they want to buy on with that IAP revenue. So for this example here, you can see that Hit the Clown as an app has a little bit higher IAP revenue, 1,500 versus Talking Cat, which has 1,100. Now, if you're an app that monetizes through ads and IAP, and you're only looking at the IAP, you sort of have one piece of the pie here. Again, for this, you might associate a higher bid or more traffic coming, or you would want more traffic to come from Hit the Clown because of this higher IAP. But if you don't have the full picture, which looks like this in this example, you could see that ad revenue is a little less on Hit the Clown, making the total IAP plus ad revenue actually less than Talking Cat. So an app you may have bid up on incorrectly, without seeing the full picture, you would have actually bid up on Talking Cat because the total revenue from this source is higher than Hit the Clown. So this is some of the things that we saw with Andrew for Guess the Emoji. Saw that we wanted to make sure we were buying on the correct full picture of data, the IAP plus ad revenue. And again, for Guess the Emoji, it was heavily ad revenue, so we really needed this piece to be able to buy effectively. Cool. So we talked about the 3 pillars that we focused on: marketability, creative, as well as LTV and buying on the true ROAS. Now we'll discuss a little bit about how kind of this app, Guess the Emoji, was able to utilize this growth loop.
All right. So do you want me to go, Hussein?
Go for it.
Okay, cool. Again, Hussein and I and the rest of the ironSource team, we met last year. We had kind of a workshop, and one of the things that came up in the workshop was that we had a huge portfolio, and of course, they recommended, hey, why don't we test some of these apps in your portfolio to see if they have a high marketability, which would be kind of a check mark in the first of the 3 boxes of a successful game. One of those apps that we tested, of course, was Guess the Emoji, and so you know, right away we ran some ads, right? So we spent some money, and we saw immediately that even with some basic ads that we had just kind of whipped up, there was a pretty reasonable IPM. It's far better than the Brain and Puzzle average for that category, and it's even getting close to what some might call a hyper casual IPM. We felt like we could do even better, so we definitely gave it a shot and began building out more creative, and I can report to you today that we have far exceeded this 27 IPM at this point. One of the ways that we've done that is, of course, through creative testing and iteration. ironSource has been really great with building out not only video creative for us, but also these interactive end cards, which are just fantastic. They've done a number of different designs for us. Here are 2 that you can see. Both have done, I can tell you, have done very well. And we continue to iterate even today with these end cards, also playables, as well as video too. So once we realized that Guess the Emoji was a marketable game, we were going to be able to drive traffic to the game at a significant volume. And it was to some degree marketing like a hyper casual game. I spent some time in the App Store. I went and I downloaded basically the top 10 games, which in this case were all hyper casual, and started playing them. And it's very obvious that there are some things that these savvy developers have figured out to get people to watch ads, and they are very effective at it. So we made some changes to the game. One of the things we did on this image here on the left is we added a watch video ad button so users could earn more currency. Pretty standard, no big deal, but very effective. In the middle here is what we kind of spotted in some hyper casual games. We call this the slot machine. Basically, an animation goes off, the user's rewarded with the coins, let's say when they level up, for example. And we, of course, give them the opportunity to watch a video ad to roll yet again and earn more currency. Another really common hyper casual thing that you see, and if you've ever played a hyper casual game, you've seen this, is where as you progress through the game, you collect a series of keys, and then those keys eventually open a bunch of chests. And if you want to open more chests, you got to watch more videos. It's very clever, and that's another mechanic that we've implemented in our games as well. And then here on the right, of course, again, pretty standard, watch video for a hint. Okay, so once we got the game updated, once we got the creative working well, we moved on to kind of an ongoing project, which is merging the ARM data, the ad revenue management data, and our Kochava data. So Kochava happens to be our mobile measurement partner, but You, of course, can merge your ARM data with any mobile measurement partner. It's just important, of course, to be able to see ARPU and ROAS and all these other metrics by partner that you're buying from. So this was extremely important and a key piece to making this a successful, I guess, quote, relaunch of Guess the Emoji. So did it work? I can tell you that we didn't quite make it to #1 overall again like we did in 2014, but it was very successful. Guess the Emoji peaked, or so far has peaked at #1 in its category in trivia here, for example, and it's been bouncing around in the top 100 and top 200 apps ever since. So it's doing quite well, and it has been it's definitely a welcome addition to our portfolio of games and has been a moneymaker since we revived the app. And we will continue to work on it for the foreseeable future. It's been excellent. So yes, it did in fact work.
Awesome. Yeah, the success here has been awesome. We were super excited to see that we were able to help this game grow, bring it back to life, and make it one of the staples of Andrew's portfolio. So it's a super exciting project for us. And I think we were really, it was really blown away by kind of the success there. So super cool. But some of the key takeaways, we're kind of tying this all back together and wanted to make it sort of actionable for you guys and helping you understand kind of what the key takeaways from this are. One of the biggest things that I think kind of goes a little bit unspoken is just sort of understanding the market trends. Tools like App Annie or Sensor Tower or Apptopia, those kind of tools, or even just browsing, honestly, browsing through the App Store really sets the stage for kind of what's going on in the market, what kind of games are popular, what's happening. And because we understood the market trends and we felt like we had a pretty good grasp of it, we were able to sort of identify Guess the Emoji in particular and say, okay, we think this actually fits in with the market trend today. Potentially 2 years ago or even a year and a half ago, it may not have, but because of today's sort of market trends, it works well. So what I'm saying here really is that the market trends are super important to understand. And I think this kind of ties back to the next point is that, you know, what may not have worked back then may work now and vice versa. The market's evolving a ton. So if you have a game that represents sort of a quote unquote lower LTV, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad game or a game that you want to throw away. You really need to understand the second part of that equation, which was the IPM part. So when we were discussing with Andrew, we knew that some of these games were potentially low LTV, but we weren't really able to answer that question of is it marketable or not. And that was the biggest thing for us, was sort of tying that equation, that fun equation of bid times IPM equals eCPM. That is the marketability equation. I think it's super important for us to know. Definitely helpful for being able to identify apps within your portfolio that might be able to be brought back. And then once you've identified the marketability and you feel comfortable with the creatives you're running, the biggest thing here that's going to set you apart, because it's such a UA-driven market today, is being able to buy on true ROAS, having full data visibility through your ad revenue as well as your in-app purchases, modeling that out and buying really, really according to those numbers and making sure you're buying as effective as possible will put you above your competitors and have a slight advantage there as well. So making sure that that's done.